we are at the sort of we will be one of the lowest cost producers in the world, in the Western world. I believe even below the Chinese cost of production. And we are ranked independently as the highest margin development company in the world today in terms of rare earth development. So we have a very exciting project. We in our definitive feasibility study stage at the moment, which we'll complete next year in 2026. And we intend to be in construction in South Africa in 2027 and in production in 2028. So we're a near-term producer, because rare earth projects or all mining projects, most people don't realize what you call cradle to grave, from discovery to production, average of 20 years. And I started with this project in 2021, in January 21, and we'll be about 8 years from realizing we had rare earths in the phosphogypsum at Phalaborwa to production. Thank you.
That is quite an achievement, to be able to rival those global players like China. So for South Africa, absolute win, and I have to congratulate you on that. Amazing.
Thank you.
So, future of commodities. Anja, who is going to use the commodities in the next 5 to 10 years? We hear how long it takes to develop a mine. 20 years, quite a long time to start up. Who is going to be the primary commodity users globally?
I think, is this on? It's on. I think that's such a, I don't want to put my reputation to having all the answers, but a lot of what we've invested in specifically related to commodities with Hibarri was we kind of invested because we understood that the emerging markets will require a lot of commodities. So Hibarri basically is a commodity listing platform. It's a marketplace like Amazon, and it just makes the world of commodities more efficient for commodity producing businesses to get to their audience. Obviously with Amazon or with Takealot, all of these different type of marketplaces, you just kind of order and your product gets to your house in like 3 days, which is amazing. But when it comes to wholesale raw material inputs, that's not as accessible. And anyway, so what we understand as Hibarri and the markets that we want to keep targeting are actually obviously AI. I think Jay mentioned that from Ripple Nami. With this huge investment into AI in the States, they're going to require a lot of aluminium and a lot of bauxite, because all of those stacks in the data centers, the racks actually, require aluminium and obviously a lot of critical minerals. Green energy, solar panels requiring lots of antimony and other type of inputs. I mean, they're making solar panels from pretty much whatever is most cost effective and works the most properly. On the agricultural side, obviously we have a huge human population of 8 billion people plus. That's growing. So I think there are a lot of emerging markets that kind of drive the demand for raw materials, and I think now is probably one of the best times in history to invest in raw materials, and that's where I said, can we take a risk, people? Because South Africa has no venture capital ecosystem. We have like, I think, 10 venture capital companies here. George goes to the UK to get his money. Because there it's kind of, well, I mean, I don't know if they're more conservative there, but in the United States, you have more than $10 trillion of venture capital. And these are huge, huge amounts of funds that are being administered with the purpose, obviously, of growing the economy, making a profit, but primarily targeting businesses that are onto something. So I think we've also got to put our focus on, yes, there are those huge emerging markets, and they're going to continue driving the demand for commodities, and that should obviously be our kind of northern star for where are we putting our money, but also where can we raise money? Are we willing to take a risk on South Africa? And I must say, with Brand South Africa getting involved here, this is quite a huge moment for us as a country, I think, where we can see that our national brand values the commodity ecosystem. I mean, I know this is not relevant to your question, but I think that that is going to drive a lot of investment here. And they definitely, I think we can trust that the government of this country is putting their cash into new things. They are putting their time and effort and energy and attention and media onto things that matter and that are going to make money for the country. So in an economy that is really focused on its image and its brand and its perception, in such an economy, one will become able to build new emerging markets. You'll be able to invest into commodities with foreign direct investment, with money from outside of the country, because our brand is improving. So I think that, to your question, more emerging markets will start existing, and I actually think South Africa will start building those markets.
Thank you. George, to you, I think what would be interesting, I think just to start off your question again, what is the commodities going to be used in the future for? Can you maybe just explain to us with this answer, what is the difference between a rare earth and a critical mineral? And to what extent, does what you do with the rare earths plays into the future demand for, AI, green energy? Is this what we're going to use it for, or is it going to be something else?
Well, I'll try and answer it as best as I can. Rare earths are actually critical minerals, to be honest with you, probably the most critical of the so-called critical minerals. But critical minerals, the US government launched an updated list just 2 weeks ago. Things like lithium and cobalt and tin is critical, copper is critical, because these are all metals that are part of the green energy transition and part of this big growth in AI. Data centers require massive power. We've heard that earlier. That means you need more copper. EVs, plug-in hybrids require a lot of cobalt, lithium in their battery makeup, and it's changing all the time. Those are deemed critical, as we know. You've also got aluminium now becoming more critical again in terms of, once again, being driven by AI. So, there's so many commodities these days that are deemed critical. Manganese, high-grade manganese, also required for batteries, battery storage, that's been deemed critical as well. So there's so many critical minerals today, and South Africa has a lot of those critical minerals, and we have some rare earth assets as well. But rare earths, when I say probably the most critical, is because people don't realize that all modern tech requires rare earths in some form or another. If you take a simple thing like fiber optic cable, that the whole world relies on for communication now, you can't make fiber optic cable without erbium, which is a rare earth people don't even talk about. Everyone was focused recently and still focused on neodymium, praseodymium, two rare earths that go into permanent magnets, as well as two other elements called dysprosium and terbium, known as heavy rare earths. You can't make permanent magnets without these rare earth elements. Permanent magnets go into your cell phone, vibrates with a permanent magnet. Your earphones have permanent magnets. Your plug-in hybrids and your electric motor vehicles have permanent magnets. But people don't realize that when China put export bans in April, when they're having the tariff war with the US, and they banned export of permanent magnets, even GM and Ford and Mercedes and BMWs, what we call ICE vehicle motor lines, in other words, internal combustion engine vehicle lines, they shut down because even those executives didn't realize that a normal ICE vehicle's got 1 kilogram of permanent magnets in it. So it's across all aspects. Your drones, your handheld consumer electronics, your air conditioners now have permanent magnet motors. And then very, very critical for defense. As the whole world is now, the geopolitics are, as we know, not in very good shape at the moment. You've got massive conflict between political pressure or tension between China, Russia, and America and the West. And now all the defense budgets in the EU have been expanded, and we're going to see massive spending in defense. And to give an example, an F-35 fighter jet's got 420 kilograms of rare earths per jet. A California-class submarine's got about 2 to 3 tons of rare earths per submarine. Your drones require rare earths. Your night vision goggles, your heat-seeking missiles, your missile guidance systems all require rare earths in some form or another. And with increased spend in defense globally, we're going to see more demand for these strategic rare earths in defense applications, as well as your just general green energy transition. Your wind turbines, we heard earlier about everyone talking about green energy. Your 3 megawatt wind turbine's got 2 tons of permanent magnets per turbine, and about 700 kilos of that 2 tons are rare earths. So very, very critical in what we're trying to achieve in the world today in terms of energy transition, green energy, electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and other areas that rare earths are very important. And as I said, and the other commodities we talk about, lithium and that, they are key for batteries, for battery storage, for electric vehicles, and so forth.
Yeah, definitely. So I can't help to just, keep the conversation a little bit here before I move to Anje again. But at the moment, China dominates the production of these rare earths, right? Do you think there's an opportunity for South Africa, for Africa, going forward to rival China? How long is that going to take?
I'm afraid it's never going to happen. A very simple answer. China has got 60% of the primary production of rare earth mineral concentrate, and they control 20% next door out of Myanmar, and they've got 95% of the downstream processing. The whole Western world is trying to create independent supply chain outside of China in terms of primary mining production, and then to do some beneficiation. If we get 20-30% ex-China, we'll be doing very well over the next 20-30 years. China is going to dominate for a long, long time. And the reason why I say Africa can't dominate is that, I'm going to pour a bit of water on the previous panel here. People talk about beneficiation in Africa. It's a pipe dream, I mean, Australia mine iron ore. They don't have steel mills in Australia. They don't beneficiate the iron ore. They send it to China. China makes steel. They're the most efficient producers of steel in the world. And that's not going to change for a long time. And to beneficiate, you need reliable power and you need cheap power. South Africa does not fit that bill. Since 1994, Eskom's power bill has gone up 11-fold. Now, if you just take inflation, we should have gone up maybe 3 or 4-fold. We've gone up 11-fold. And, we want to do, people talk about doing more beneficiation. Beneficiation is reducing in South Africa because of power. Over the last 3 years, 6 beneficiation plants have closed down in South Africa. That's been non-ferrous metal type of chromite beneficiation, zinc, copper smelters, whatever, all closing down. Why? Unreliable power, cost of power. Can't compete with China. So, for South Africa to have cheap power, and I hear the guys on the stage there talking about, cheap power. They're talking about cheap power from where we stand. We should never be where we are at the moment. So the reason why solar and wind has got such momentum in South Africa is because Eskom is producing power so expensively. If Eskom had just been able to produce power in terms of inflation over the last 25 years, these wind and solar projects would be battling to make inroads into South Africa because they wouldn't be able to compete on the price per kilowatt hour. The reason why they're cheaper and the reason why there's so much wind and solar being generated is because Eskom power has gone so expensive now, and now they can compete cheaper than Eskom, and we've seen a big proliferation of this type of energy in South Africa, which is welcome because Eskom continues to push up tariffs by 25-30%, which is totally unsustainable. So if you want beneficiation, you need cheap power, first thing. Then a lot of beneficiation in terms of not only trying to smelt and do refining of copper and zinc and those type of things, which require a lot of power. You need reagents. Reagents like sulfuric acid. If I'm talking about rare earths now, you need sulfuric acid, oxalic acid. You need quite a sophisticated suite of what we call reagents. South Africa is the best country in Africa for that because we do have a lot of those reagents, and that's why I can do beneficiation of my rare earths in South Africa. But you talk about going further north, to have a rare earth project in the middle of the bush somewhere in Tanzania or in Malawi or whatever, you have to transport very, very expensive reagents, thousands of kilometers. That makes it very difficult for those projects to be economic because you don't have those reagents being manufactured on African soil, and you have to transport them. So, for me, African countries talk about beneficiation, they just don't really understand what they're talking about, because what they should be focusing on is do the primary production of their raw minerals, be it copper, be it uranium, be it whatever, and ship those, or be it iron ore, ship those to the countries that can beneficiate them, the cheapest in the world, and use those tax dollars and those royalty revenues to build industry within those countries. And eventually you'll get to a point where you have got reliable power. Spend the money on reliable power, cheap power, good infrastructure, and then can you start thinking about maybe trying to beneficiate. But you need there's 30 years of work to do before you want to say, I want to beneficiate in my country and compete with China or compete with India. I think it's impossible, to be honest.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily just only us, Africa, who's struggling with this. This is more a global issue. You know, most countries are going to struggle. Brazil,
it's a global issue.
Australia, all going to struggle to really compete with the Chinese.
Correct. There's smelters closing down all over the world, ex-China. They can't compete with China. China's got overcapacity. So, now you want to build more capacity in Africa at twice the price of China. What's the point? It's a waste of time. Rather focus on what you can do well, which is mine the primary product, use those tax revenues efficiently, and you know what I mean by efficiently, and build your country and build your infrastructure, build cheap power. Eventually you can start looking at beneficiation. But it's not something that you can do next year or 5 years' time.
Anja, do you have the opportunity to use your tech platforms to address some of these cost pressures that is being spoken about here on stage?
Well, we can do an example. So, George, are you selling your rare earths to China?
No.
Okay. Where are you selling it to?
They're going to go to Western off-takers, because I'm part of, as I said, I'm very focused on being part of a global supply chain, ex-China.
Okay, so basically, with the Hibarri platform, what we're doing is we're taking resources. Currently, we have some vanilla from Madagascar. We've got some cocoa from up in Africa. I don't know if it was Ghana or Cote d'Ivoire. And then obviously your rare earths and your minerals and stuff. So what we would do as an example, George, critical example, is we take that commodity and we market it to the States. Hibarri is also incorporated in the United States already. We're starting to set up office that side and, start building a presence in the States as well. So, it's not that the United States is the biggest market, only market that we're targeting. It's just that is the biggest economy. So from an operational standpoint, Hibarri is about a year old now as a brand. Can you guys believe? So from an operational standpoint, our platform now has the capacity to handle about 1 million people listing on it. And then we don't even really have to do any marketing because people are Googling things. Like, I know it sounds very simple, but when I'm looking for a dentist, I quickly search dentist near me. Or if I'm looking to do my hair, a hairdresser near me. Or you just go on Google Maps. So the way that people are finding things is pretty much search engine driven. So I think that it all depends on the companies that are listing on the platform, to answer your question. It depends who lists on the platform and who is actually utilizing it to source their inputs. But I do think it can help solve a lot of problems. Firstly, I think it speeds up world trade because realistically, George, nobody in the States knows you unless you go sell yourself to them or your company and your product. So because they don't know what is available or who has it or where it is, they can't find it and then they can't spend money on it. So it seems like a very simple issue, but it's actually a huge logistical error because it causes a massive marketing spend for the producer, like George, who has to fly everywhere to ensure that the gospel about rainbow rare earths is spread. It would be easier for George to list on our platform, so he's very welcome to. But basically the main problem we're trying to solve in the world is that besides that we will definitely reach $1 billion valuation soon, but that doesn't matter in South Africa because we don't have a venture capital ecosystem, which I do hope, but that's a problem to solve. I think if people can see problems as these money machines, that'll be amazing. Your self-interest is actually what drives the economy. And there are a lot of companies like us that exist in this country, but that maybe didn't have the expertise to go and raise capital outside of the country to be able to secure enough runway to actually kick off and build a success out of their company. So I do think a big problem that we'll solve is startup ecosystems will be born out of the opportunities created with the platform, in the sense that a farmer can now kind of sell their product in advance, and they can get a customer for, maybe they have a patch of land. So depending on how much money they have, let's say they're only farming oranges on the one side, and then they don't have enough money right now to plant. But an orange tree takes how long? I mean, I'm not a farmer, but an orange tree takes like 3 years to grow. But if they know that there is a customer on the other side that can easily be found, okay, I know there are these agricultural markets that kind of, changes that. But the point is, because the customer can find them so quickly, there's a lot more investor confidence from the farmer and from the customer. So it creates an opportunity where they can connect and the customer can potentially invest. I don't know, like with, again, as an example, if George has any investors that are the actual off-taker of the commodity, do you?
We are talking to off-take partners. You might give us some funding, yes, but we're talking, the type of off-take partners we talk to are global sort of OEMs and that. And it's a very specific product that needs to go into the midstream and then permanent magnet manufacturing. And yeah, that's a very, it's quite technical. It's not something we can just list on the website.
So you're saying the specification might not, if you just list the spec?
No, it's not something that, I mean, all just speaking about rare earths now, I'm not talking about other commodities, but for us, we have to enter into off-take agreements with sort of OEMs or the midstream, for them to have security of supply. And that's what they're looking for, security of supply. And obviously your product has to meet a very, very high spec to be able to enter into that type of off-take agreement.
So that's quite brilliant, obviously, to get an upfront investment from a customer, but also the customers depend on these inputs to produce their products. So these partnerships are beneficial for everybody. So a cool function of the platform is that you can send messages between a buyer and a supplier. So even if your spec wasn't perfectly put on there, if you listed tantalum for sale in South Africa with some of the spec and some photos of the operations, that already increases visibility and ability for people that are already searching for tantalum to kind of find it. So I do think we'll solve a few of those problems. I don't think we can really fix, we obviously can't fix all of it, but I think we'll solve quite a few.
Wonderful. So with all these new, demands for rare earths, critical minerals, do you see new players on the continent, George? Do you see, I know China mines a lot in Africa, luckily rainbow mineral, but do we see new investors like from the GCC countries, the US, for instance, the Lobito Corridor? Is this opening up new opportunities for us?
No, it's definitely happening. We've seen the US take a concerted effort to get more involved in Africa. I think it was 2 years ago, the US delegation to the mining indaba was the biggest in the history of the mining indaba. So there's renewed interest from the US on the continent. The Chinese have been here for a long time. They've owned and controlled many, many strategic mines. They had a vision many, many years ago, and they then rolled out that vision successfully. And so, yes, the EU, not so much, but I think the big players will be China, as they are already, and we're going to see America getting more involved. Africa's got a big endowment of all minerals, and lots of those are the critical minerals we're talking about. And so, yes, I believe there's opportunity, but once again, as I said, to talk about trying to beneficiate those minerals, I think, is a pipe dream. Let's rather focus on extracting those minerals out the ground, using, as I said, those tax dollars to build those countries, build the right infrastructure. Eventually, we can look at the beneficiation downstream. You get industries coming on into the country that can support those beneficiation processes, like reagents and so forth. But in the meantime, export them to the best market in the world to beneficiate them, and just focus on what you can do well, And as I said, there are lots of key commodities in Africa that the world needs, and I think that makes us very well positioned to supply the right commodities for this transition we've seen. But let's stick to what we do best.
Before I go to the audience, just one other question, and a last one to you as well. Don't you also think this renewed interest by foreign partners are in some sense helping infrastructural development? I think about Lobito Corridor, the Simondo Corridor, Liberation Corridor, all in West Africa. A railway being developed into Tanzania, Burundi to get the nickel out of the ground. To some extent, that has to, is really supporting some infrastructural regional integration as well.
It definitely is, yes. And infrastructure is key, not only to move those commodities to the ports, but eventually, as I say, you talk about beneficiation, to move what you need on those rail lines to where you're going to do some beneficiation. So it's a whole, these things take many, many years to develop. And the Lobito Corridor is key as well, but it's purely to move primary product to the coast, to the markets, which are, once again, Chinese at this stage. It's most of those commodities running along those rail lines or will be running on those rail lines are not going to Europe, or they're not going to America for beneficiation. It's all going, unfortunately, China, and I think India is also going to play a very big part in that. Has been a market that will take, they are a market that is focused on being the next powerhouse, and with 1.4 billion people, you can easily see why that will be the next powerhouse after China.
For me, I think, George, the big win would be if we can unlock, say, other type of commodities onto that rail as well. For instance, agriculture. If we can diversify economies to some extent and make sure that also develop, and I think that's where the real wins will lie, and hopefully that will happen under the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement that has been spoken a lot about this morning. A lot of opportunities there as well. And Anja, just maybe I hear a lot of frustration about access to financing. What do you think is the one thing that will change investors' minds about investing in Africa and a platform like yours?
I think conferences play a very big role, because it's a huge collaboration, and also there's a lot of media involved, and it streams internationally, and I think that that's kind of why we brought this to South Africa. Also because we know the market and we already have some form of a developed network here, so we thought, well, this conference might help us get to that point. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily a frustration, but we anyways plan now to fly to the United States to go raise capital, because it's just an intelligent option. You don't need to own 100% of anything. You need to build what's necessary to build. As an entrepreneur, and being stingy with your equity isn't going to get you to where you need to get to. I think, George, you guys are listed.
Yes, we're listed in London, yeah.
So, George has mastered that one. So, obviously, IPO it's a very big thing. And most of the large brands in this country are obviously listed companies, but very few are venture capital backed of your larger companies. So you have like the huge ones, listed entities, the recognizable brands, the Sasols, the XROs here. I don't know if XRO is listed. So obviously, being able to IPO gets a company to a much higher level. And in order to IPO, you need venture capital, because nobody, no person, unless you're already a billionaire, has enough cash to build a ginormous brand and the types of brands that brand South Africa would like to see. So I think that if we can develop, and the problems aren't bad things, problems are opportunities. I think if a few companies can invest their capital as limited partners into venture capital funds, this country's economy is going to go from, I think it's like $480 billion it will go deep into the trillions, because the United States is a $27 trillion economy, but they also have like $10 trillion, which obviously accumulated over years, but roughly $10 trillion is venture capital money. So they're willing to spend into, I mean, if George had access to an investor right now, or a couple of investors, let's say $10 billion, how many minds can you open up with that amount of money? And besides for that, how huge can your brand be as a company? So I think what benefits the economy and what benefits a company and what benefits people on an individual level from a profit viewpoint is one and the same. So, so I definitely think we have a lot of opportunities. I think a lot of people will miss out on the opportunity to invest in Hibarri because we don't have a formalized venture capital system in this country yet. But I do think after having this discussion that the ball will start rolling. We're in year one of the International Commodity Summit, by the way, if it felt a little bit longer for anybody. It's year one. We are at the basically grain size of the snowball. And everybody that's sitting on the stage and in the audience is at in some way, shape or form at the grain size of their own snowball. So obviously snowball, runway, having capital in companies that show huge prospects of success, and opportunity within those companies, I think that kind of venture capital will change this country. I definitely think that will, it'll push us into $1 trillion economy.